Hello everyone, or shall I call you the future test managers of the software industry. Hope you're excited for the very beginning of our ISTQB Test Management V3 series. Trust me, we will have good times. I believe this is one of the shortest introductions I ever made. That's because a long syllabus is awaiting us, so we don't have any time to waste. Now, because this lecture is just an introduction and I believe most of you are certified testers anyway, I guess this one is going to be a smooth ride. So let's get into it very quickly. Alright, I believe we should start our journey by taking an overview of the test process. I know, sounds boring, but bear with me, we're just following the syllabus structure here. So, the test process is considered the backbone of any testing activity taking place during any software project. You also know that the test process is not just a bunch of random tasks by any means. We are talking about a structured set of steps that will definitely help us in testing the software, but in a well-organized, effective, and repeatable way. Also, we all know that testing is context-dependent. Therefore, there are a ton of variables that can affect this testing process. Say different SDLC models, different project factors, and different team factors, maybe different suits, and different risks, all having a huge impact on how the testing process is carried out. Of course, you don't expect the test process in a banking app to be the same as what's found in a social media app, or the test process within an agile team to be the same as a team following the waterfall model, right? So I want you to imagine that you're working in a company that builds software products, maybe mobile apps, web apps, maybe internal apps, or even all of them. Depending on how big the company is and how many teams or projects are going on, the flexibility of the test process allows it to be organized and customized differently. That's where these three levels come in: project, program, and portfolio. Let's go over them one by one. Project level, and this is the most basic one. You've got one product team working on a specific release. Say your team is rolling out a new feature for a ride-sharing app like Uber. Your role as a test manager here is to lead a small team, maybe a couple of testers, some developers, and the product owner. Your job is to ensure a smooth and successful release of that new feature. It's like managing a single pizza delivery. You've only got one order, and your job is to get it to the customer hot and on time. And now I feel hungry. Anyway, program level, on the other hand, is one step up. Here, you're dealing with multiple related projects that need to work together. Test management isn't just about one feature or one team anymore, it's about coordination. Back to our Uber-style app example, imagine one team is working on the driver app and another team is building the passenger app. Of course, both apps need to be in sync because if the end user can schedule a ride on the passenger app, the driver's app better be ready to accept it. Your job as a test manager at this level is to customize the test process so that all teams are aligned and testing efforts are coordinated perfectly. Now, for the portfolio level, which is a whole other story. Maybe your company doesn't just build a ride-sharing app. It also builds a food delivery app, a payment wallet gateway, and an in-car system for self-driving cars. This guru-level company will require a guru-level management powers in order to define wide testing standards, set quality goals across different products, track metrics, and make complex decisions. Speaking of tracking metrics and making decisions, do you still remember to which test activity they belong? Yes? Excellent. They belong to test monitoring and control. And to be more specific, tracking metrics is a test monitoring activity, and making decisions is a test control activity. So why not take a very quick revision on these 7 core activities of the test process? Let's start with the test plan. This is where everything begins, and here we define things like objectives, scope, resources, schedules, and deliverables of the test process, among many other things, of course. Then we have test monitoring and control. Monitoring measures and checks things like, are we on track, how many tests passed versus failed, and so on. But control, on the other hand, is where we take corrective actions to get things back on track. Up next is test analysis, and here we review the test bases like requirements to identify what should be tested, aka test conditions. Brings a lot of memories from foundation level, right? Next is test design, in which we define the required test cases needed to test our system under test or SUT. Also, we define the specifications of the test environments that's going to be used during test execution. Test implementation is our next step, and this is where we prepare the required test data and set up our test environments. Test execution is where the fun begins, and here you run tests, record results, report them, and retest if necessary. Finally, test completion, the wrap-up activity. Here we archive our test artifacts, test cases and reports, evaluate the entire test process, identify lessons learned, and then communicate the closure to stakeholders. Now, as test managers, you're naturally responsible for the entire test process. But, and this is super important, test managers are expected to perform 3 main activities by themselves: test planning, test monitoring and control, and test completion. These 3 activities fall under the full responsibility of the test managers. And because these 3 activities are super important, let's give them some extra focus. So if we look again at test planning, you can see that here we as test managers wear the strategist hats. We are setting up directions and expectations of the entire testing efforts. In test planning, we define a set of criteria to be followed during testing. Objectives are one of them. For instance, we can say that ensuring that our SUT will work smoothly on all devices is a test objective, and we define this objective in test planning. Another element is the approach to be followed during the test execution. Broad lines, say new features to be tested manually and test automation for regression testing of the old features. The scope is where we define what to be tested and what is not to be tested. For example, our scope can include all SUT functional characteristics while leaving the non-functional aspects out of the scope. Resources are where we define the manpower requirements as well as the financial requirements or budget. The schedules explain itself, of course, and deliverables are the outcomes of the test process. We can think of the test plan and the bug reports as examples. Lastly, the participants who will be involved in the test process must be defined during the test planning activity. Of course, all of these aspects are elements found in the test plan. However, a test plan is not limited to only those elements, but can extend to include other important aspects relevant to the test process, such as risk analysis, entry and exit criteria, and tool selection criteria. Great, now let's shift our focus to the next activity that concerns us as test managers: test monitoring and control. Here, you take off the strategist hats and put the project manager's one on. What you're doing basically is tracking the progress of the current project against what's defined in the test plan. Analyze the deviations and understand why these deviations happened in the first place. Report these tracking results to anyone who's interested in the test process in the form of stand-up meetings or weekly reports. And lastly, and most importantly at the same time, take the required decisions that will put things back on the right track. For instance, increasing the test budget if you found that it was originally underestimated, or adding a new tester to the team if you notice things are moving slower than expected. Of course, you'll use apps like Jira or TestRail or even custom dashboards to collect this information or metrics. So that's something also to keep in mind. Now, we have to take off our hats for one last time, and this time we are replacing the project manager's hat with a hat of a historian. Welcome to test completion. So, as the name suggests, this activity takes place when completing a test milestone. Maybe after the completion of a test level, a test cycle, an iteration, or, you guessed it, an entire project. During test completion, we archive our testware, evaluate what went well and what went wrong, but most importantly, we must learn from our mistakes and make plans for future improvement. Also, we communicate the closure report with other stakeholders and prepare for the next testing mission. So, I think you can see it right now. As test managers, you have the helicopter view. You have all the data and you have the power to make changes. That's why it's all about continuous improvement. Your role as a manager is essential when it comes to improving the test process. This is an extremely important thing to always remember when you manage. And that's it. Congratulations, everyone. First mission, check. A long journey is awaiting us, but I'm confident it's going to be a smooth and joyful ride. Of course, if you need any assistance at any time or you need to ask about anything, feel free to post in the QA section and I'll make sure to address your inquiries as soon as possible. Thanks for staying with me. Take care and I'll see you on the next one.